So, the local market starts the year in its strongest position since 2018. 2020 has been a wild year for investors, with volatile swings in share prices of the country's largest listed companies. The oil price crashed in April as the globe confronted COVID-19, but indeed a phenomenal comeback by the end of 2020 on the back of vaccine hopes. Now, David Shapiro is from SASFIN. He joins me now. David, thanks indeed for talking to us. While economies were faltering when we confronted this coronavirus and COVID-19, 2020 did produce some breathtaking winning shares, didn't they? And it just goes to show that, the stock market did bounce back. How did you read what happened on the local market in 2020?
No one expected the kind of result that we saw, particularly on global markets. But, if you break it down, Devan, you've got to break it down into what really performed. And when you look at the performances on the JSE, it was largely the processed Naspers, which was lifted by Tencent, which is an internet company, and global internet companies did exceptionally well. Richemont, British American Tobacco, some of the big internationals also did well. And then the miners. It was all the miners, gold miners, platinum miners, and even our big diversified miners, BHP and Anglos, all did well. And that was the top end of the market. What dragged the market down or kind of negated those gains were the local South African economy. And you can understand why financials and globally financials were under pressure, banks. The others were the property market and retailers, largely as the country went into lockdown. And of course, their profits were hammered. So you have to weigh up the two markets. But the fact that we actually ended positive, I think, is really a great sign. And I think this year we're probably going to see even better markets as we move out of, as the vaccines start to get globally circulated or widely circulated, and we move out of this awful period that we've gone through.
David, one of the other reasons I've heard is the fact that interest rates are tremendously low at the moment, for obvious reasons, with the reserve banks and the central banks. So there's a search for a heel, isn't there? And the equities seem to be appealing at the moment, and some say that might go on for some time.
That's going to go on for a couple of years, simply because of the actions taken by governments and by central banks. Interest rates globally, not in South Africa, but globally, will remain zero for a long time. And I'm using zero as a proxy. So you can't get yield. And this can go on for a year or two until we fully recover from the effects of the, of the pandemic. And remember, this was a health crisis. This wasn't an economic crisis or financial crisis. Therefore, the action that was taken has to be repaired. Householders are in good position. They're not in a bad position. They're not under the pressure that we saw in 2008 and 2009. So with interest rates zero, what does that mean? It just means that the hurdle rate for equities is very low. So expect equities, shares, to do exceptionally well simply because there's nowhere else to go. I think, Devan, the big question is, where do we go? Which equities do we buy? Do we buy the winners of last year, or do we start looking for the laggards? And I think that's going to be the test. It's not whether we buy equities this year, it's which equities we buy.
David Shapiro, dare I ask your thoughts on what's been dubbed digital gold? Of course, I talk of Bitcoin here. $34,000. It was $7,000 just a year ago. Let me get your take.
I have no take. I don't understand the market. The only thing that scares me is if you tracked Bitcoin last year, you understand the volatility that this can go through. And that's a worry, because I think even over the weekend, we went up dramatically, and we fell within, I think, today as well. Have I lost you?
We seem to have lost David Shapiro there. David Shapiro talking to us, of course, on what to expect for 2020. He was actually giving us his take on this phenomenal increase in Bitcoin. Would have liked to ask him some questions about the real economy, but we'll speak to David possibly later in the week. Now,